This podcast was recorded before recent federal policy changes impacted many of the programs discussed and may not reflect the most current information.
Welcome to How to Not Kill Your Community, a podcast from the Delaware Community Foundation. In each episode, we interview experts to explore the choices we make as Delawareans, how we spend our taxes, steward our land, build housing, and how those choices impact the places we call home. What happens if we neglect our libraries, turn away newcomers, let philanthropy fade? Most importantly, how do we not kill our communities? I'm Stuart Comstock-Gay, President and CEO of the DCF. Thank you for listening. Welcome back to How Not to Kill Your Community. Today, I'm so excited to be with our new U.S. Representative to Congress, Sarah McBride. Sarah is in Congress now and has been for a few months. And prior to this was in the state Senate, where she championed healthcare access, workers' rights, paid family leave, has also worked as National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign, grew up in Wilmington, just down the street from where I live, and has her poli-sci degree from American University. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, neighbor.
It's great to see you indeed. So, as you know, this podcast is called How Not to Kill Your Community. It's a tongue-in-cheek way to raise issues about, or raise questions about issues that matter in our community. And today's topic is don't ignore outsiders. And it feels especially relevant for all of us, particularly for you in your new role. And so the question is this: why shouldn't we just ignore those with who that we're different from, or with whom we have different ideas? And why shouldn't we just recognize that they're different from us, they're not one of us, and they may even be our enemies?
Well, one of the reasons why I am so proud to represent the greatest state in the union in Congress is because Delaware is a state of neighbors. And while we are imperfect, at our best, we view one another as humans, as neighbors, rather than as enemies, which is something that we are seeing far too frequently in our politics, in our country, and across and around the world. This experiment that we exist in, this more than 200-year experiment in self-determination and self-government, is only possible if we can have conversations across disagreement, if we can live and exist in our differences and our disagreement. And yes, if we can take our disagreements and maybe even learn from one another and allow ourselves to try to step into the shoes of people who live, look, or think differently than we do, and try to see the world through their perspectives. I think one of the problems we see in our politics and our country right now is that not only has compromise become a dirty word, but even having conversations with people who we disagree with has become a political liability. And this government, our society, a pluralistic, diverse community, is not possible if we can't have those conversations, if we can't have a national dialogue. And, I think the task before us in this country is to figure out how to disagree agreeably, to recognize that, yes, we have real differences of opinion. Yes, those differences of opinion might touch on topics that are deeply personal to us. But if we not only want to persist in a pluralistic society, but if we want to make progress, we have to stay proximate to one another. We have to stay in relationship with one another. We have to have those conversations, because while you might learn from them, they indeed might learn from you, and you might end up changing their mind and allow them to see you and your needs as the same as theirs. And, I think empathy and compassion are not just about finding commonality with people who are the same as us in every single way, but one or two. but rather to find commonality with people who are different than us in every single way but one, our shared humanity.
So that's great. And Sarah, I think of you as fundamentally somebody who wants to work with everybody. And you did that in the state Senate on family leave. You've done that all through your career as an elected official and all through your career in all kinds of things. And yet you're in Congress at a time when people are resisting that. And you're getting a lot of bad stuff headed your way. And so how do you stay constant with this idea that even if I disagree with you on most things, even if I'm different from you on most things, it's important for us to be in community?
Well, as you mentioned, I was really proud that during my time in the Delaware State Senate, I introduced and passed some really significant and in some cases controversial bills: paid family and medical leave, the largest investment in healthcare in our state's Medicaid program since the Affordable Care Act, legislation around digital citizenship, media literacy. The list goes on. I'm proud that I was able to pass every bill but one that I introduced and passed with bipartisan support. I think bipartisan solutions are more durable solutions. And for that reason, I believe that when we have the opportunity to make something bipartisan, we should seek to do it. Now, that doesn't mean that we stop progress if we can't achieve bipartisanship or consensus. Sometimes when something is right, you've got to move forward with it, even if the road is one where you're just getting Democratic votes. But it is important to at least try. And obviously, I enter Congress at a time when partisanship is high, and frankly, I believe the stakes are high. I have not only serious disagreements with the current administration, but I believe that much of what they're doing is fundamentally illiberal. And undermines our democratic institutions and our capacity to have open, real, and full debate and dialogue in this country. And that means that I disagree really fundamentally with many of my Republican opponents. And as you mentioned, there's obviously been a unique degree of attention and vitriol against me by a small number of my colleagues who I think see me as an opportunity to gain 15 minutes of fame on social media. But one of the things I've actually found is that in a weird way, by not responding and taking the bait from some of those far right members who are targeting me personally, by rising above it, or trying to at least, and seeking to see in my colleagues across the aisle what voters in their district saw in them, even if some of them refused to do that with me, it's actually brought in some unlikely friendships and relationships with colleagues, both moderate and conservative, in the Republican caucus. I've had people who come up and apologize for the way some of their colleagues are behaving. I've had people come up and, even if they're not apologizing with such intentionality, say, welcome to Congress. We're so lucky to have you here. I've had others even say, we should figure out a way to work together.
Wow. So
we show people that not everyone's like this. I was proud to be the first freshman Democrat to introduce legislation in this Congress, and it was bipartisan. And so, what it reminds me is something I've seen throughout my time in legislative politics, which is, yes, there's a lot of media attention on the controversy. There's a lot of media attention on the high profile issues where maybe the fault lines are partisan. But the reality is that a lot of what a legislative body does is bipartisan. Most of the time I go to the floor, I'm voting with Democrats and Republicans in support of something. And that doesn't get attention. It doesn't grab headlines. But in each of those instances, we are moving forward important, tangible policy, in some cases life-saving policy for the people that we represent. And when we maintain those moments, those opportunities to come together and support something, to work together, to roll up our sleeves and to dive into the details together, even if we're doing that on maybe a smaller, more technical change to law, By doing that on those issues, you build relationship, you build trust, you build respect for one another, which then allows you to navigate the thornier issues better and more effectively. And I've seen that time and time again, and I've already seen that during my time in Congress. And I think for me, as someone who's 34, a queer transgender person, people might not expect me to talk about the need for bipartisanship, the need for collaboration. I'm here to work with anyone who's willing to work with me to help Delaware, and I'll stand up to anyone who I believe is going to harm Delaware. But I think the country needs to hear from elected officials that they might not expect this message from, because at the end of the day, this is the grease of government, and the greatest threat that we face, the threat that I believe is personified in the person who's in the White House right now, that threat is only possible because people have lost trust and faith that government can efficiently and effectively meet their needs. So we have to make government work better, and the only way to make government work better is to be able to work better with one another.
So let's talk about hope for a moment and the role of hope in this. And I would both say, I'd love to hear you talk about the phenomenon, the hope as a phenomenon, and also why should people have hope that folks really are going to work across these differences over time?
Well, look, I think there's reason for hope because it is still happening, even if it's not in the headlines. And it's definitely as bad as it's been in modern history when it comes to partisanship and toxicity. But it's not universal. So one, I think there's hope for me in the knowledge that there is good work happening across the political divide right now as we see it. But yes, this is a difficult time. And while working together has been the grease of government, it's been the grease of the presidential system we have with separation of powers and checks and balances. The reality is that as hard as this moment is, as challenging as this moment is, perhaps as tall as as high as the odds are, hope as an emotion and as a phenomenon only makes sense in the face of hardship. You only have hope because there's room for improvement, because something's not going well. That's the only time that hope makes sense. That's the only time you need hope. You don't need hope when everything's hunky-dory, when everything's moving forward. You need hope when you're looking at high odds, when you're looking at challenges before you. And look, I get that right now feels different than before. 20 years ago, it felt like if we simply worked for it, if we voted and if we volunteered and if we lifted our voices, it felt like change was inevitable. That we could, with hard work, inevitably bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. It felt like that, particularly in those, in the 90s and in the 2009, 2010. In some ways, it's really felt that way in the post-1960s era, that there was sort of this cultural momentum that we had with progress. And it doesn't feel like that right now. And what I take comfort in, what I find hope in, is the fact that that sense of inevitability, that with hard work, change would come, that is the exception in our country's history. Every single previous generation of Americans has been called to conquer seemingly impossible odds much greater than the ones we're facing right now. Enslaved people in the 1850s had no reason to believe that an Emancipation Proclamation was on the horizon. Unemployed workers during the early days of the Great Depression had never heard of a New Deal. Patrons at the Stonewall Inn never knew of an America where they could live openly and authentically as themselves without violating the law. None of them could see the light at the end of the tunnel. They didn't know that change would come, but they persevered. They summoned their hope. They found the light and they changed the world. And I have to believe that if previous generations have done it against odds much greater than the ones we face today, then so too can we.
Well, you kind of said it there. And once again, working with all kinds of people toward common interests and sometimes uncommon interests. and that's the path of the future. Congresswoman Sarah McBride, as always, great to see you, and thanks so much for joining us.
What a pleasure. Good to see you.
How to Not Kill Your Community is a podcast written and produced by the Delaware Community Foundation. Thank you to our producers at 1440 Film Company in Wilmington. The Delaware Community Foundation, DCF, stands at the intersection of generosity and community transformation. As experts in community need, we guide individuals and organizations to opportunities that impact causes they care about the most. We manage charitable funds, distribute scholarships, advise donors, and grant to nonprofits, providing leadership to cultivate the future of philanthropy in Delaware. Visit us at delcf.org for more information.